In this video we're going to look at the characterization of a system in terms of its impulse response. So let's imagine you're the managing director of a company producing widgets, and this little widget here, it just takes an input and it just gives you an output. Now you want to sell these to a client, but you say to the engineers, look, we're going to have to give them some kind of data sheet so he understands what's happening. So they know it's an electronic device and they know that it takes a voltage in, gives a voltage out. So they decide, well, we're going to characterize this, and we'll do it by putting in voltages in the input, and we'll look and see what voltage come in the output. So the simplest voltage you can think of is just a voltage that looks like that. It's just 1 volt and it doesn't change with time. So you go and have a wee look at the output and you see what you get out of the device, and what you get out of the device is a voltage that's twice the height and doesn't vary with time. So quite quickly you look and think, well, that's probably a times 2, but you're unsure of exactly, it might not be. So what you decide to do is you want to put in not just 1 volt, you put 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 volts, and you'll check and see whether you're going to get double the voltages out for each of those you put in. Okay, so you've got a nice little device and a cupboard that allows you to put a signal that looks like that. So at 1 second you put in 1 volt, 2 seconds 2 volts, 3 seconds 3 volts. So if this is a times 2, what you expect to get out at the output is a signal that at 1 volt, at 1 second, instead of getting 1 volt, you expect to get 2 volts. 2 seconds, you expect, instead of getting 2 volts, you expect to get 4, and 3, you expect to get 6. So you expect to get something that looks like that. So if the gradient of that one is 1, the gradient of that line there is going to be 2. So that's exactly what you do get. So you're quite happy, says that looks like a times 2. So as the managing director, you then say, well, I'm going to put it down in a better format for the client. So instead of calling that a question mark, you just call it some function. And you know that function takes the input and transfers it to the output. I'll say it again. The function transfers the input to the output. So you decide to call that thing a transfer function. So you say the input times this function here equals the output. So then you say, well, that function there, which I'm going to call the transfer function, can be given by dividing the output by the input. And you know that works because when you look above, if you take the voltage out at any point in time here and divide it by the voltage in at the same point in time, you'll always get a value of 2. So that value f there, the transfer function, will be times 2. So you're then able to say, well, I've got this thing and we'll call it a transfer function, and we define the transfer function as output upon input. In this instance here, that's times 2. So then you put that down your data sheet and you take it to the client and you sell him 50,000 widgets and he's happy. But then he comes back to you and says, look, there's a few wee odd things going on here. He says it's not working quite right. He says when we put in a frequency like that, okay, a height 1, that's the time and that's the input, then we get a frequency out which is times 2, and it's the same frequency but the amplitude is now times 2, and that's the output. And you say, well, that's okay, that's what's meant to happen. But then the client says, but if I increase the frequency and make the frequency higher, so the frequency now goes up like that, so it's going twice as fast, then the input is again a 1. He says what I expect to get out is that same frequency but times 2, but what happens is we don't get that frequency times 2. The frequency actually comes out at the same frequency, but it's not times 2, it's actually times a half, so it's actually attenuated. And he says, in fact, if I put in a higher frequency still, for example like this here, again it's a height 1, okay, what I get out is absolutely nothing. I get nothing coming out. So it doesn't seem to pass the high frequency signals out, it seems to attenuate them. So you say, well, that's interesting. So what we'll do is, if you want, you can send all the boxes back to us. And the client says, well, no, actually we're not going to send them back. They're quite useful because what we do is if we put in a signal here like this, which is our, in effect, a DC power supply of 1 volt, and we put that through your little times 2 box, what we get out is a signal that is height 2 but is really smooth. So this little box has smoothed out that high frequency component which is added onto the top of this DC signal, so it's quite a useful thing. So if you can just go back and maybe tweak the data sheets and let us know exactly how the device works, that would be great. But before you go, the client says, look, we noticed one other thing. He said that whenever we put that signal in like that, we get the signal out times 2 and the frequency remains the same, but it doesn't start at that point there on the waveform. It starts at a different point. So let's say it starts at that point there. So the frequency still remains the same and the amplitude is times 2. And you see, in fact, if I put in a much higher frequency, like this here, again height 1, then it doesn't start at that point. It starts somewhere along the axis at a different point. So you say, well, that's interesting, we'll take it back to engineers. So you take it all back to engineers and you say, look, we need to draw a line under this. So you draw a line under it. And you say, we need to work out exactly what's happening here. So one of the engineers says, like, look, let's see the signal we're actually putting in. So they look at the signal we're putting in. The signal x of t has got an amplitude and we're putting in sine waves. The sine waves have got a certain frequency omega and they've got a certain phase phi. Now I've got a derivation of that little equation in the snippet section, so if you're unsure where that comes from, you can go to the snippet section and that will be explained there. So I'll just call that equation number 1. So you look at it and say, well, if I put that into some system, then what I expect to get out the other side? Well, the amplitude could possibly change, the frequency could possibly change, and the phase could possibly change. But one of the engineers says, look, the frequency isn't going to change because we made the system linear. So if you made the system linear, so you say the transfer function as its input to output is some linear function, then whenever you put in a sinusoidal wave into this system here, what you're going to get out the other side there is just a linear amplification of that. Okay, so you're going to get another sinusoidal wave coming out at the same frequency but just at a different height. So the amplitude is going to be greater. And that's the reason why we designed that. We designed it like that so that whenever you put a 5 Hz signal in, all of that energy in that 5 Hz signal, when you go to the output, appears at 5 Hz on the output. So we don't want the signal to be spread out over other frequency bands, so it still remains in the one spot. He says if we had a non-linear system, then that wouldn't happen. A non-linear system, when we put our little input in, we wouldn't get a linear output. So if we put in some kind of sinusoidal wave coming in like this, then what we get coming out is another wave that's kind of sinusoidal, but it might look a bit stretched and a bit strange. So in effect, what we get coming out in the frequency domain, if we were to put a signal in, say a 5 Hz signal, and that was a frequency domain, and that's the magnitude of the frequency, then, and that's the input, say, well, what we would actually get out is we would get that signal there out at 5 Hz, but we'd also get other signals further up and further down the band. These things are called harmonics. And also, if you were to put in 2 sine waves, these harmonics would then mix with each other as well, and we would get things called intermodulation products. So at that point, the managing director say, okay, that's fine, we don't want to do that. We want to make sure we want to keep things simple. We want to make sure that we can characterize the system by ensuring that the frequency component you put in is the same as the frequency component you get out. So the engineer says, yeah, that's what we'll do, and we'll call that linear. Okay, so it's a linear system. He's like, that's great, I'll put that down in the sheet as well, the data sheet. We'll say it's a linear system. And one other thing, the engineer comes along and he says, look, another thing we ensured is that the system always works, and it's the work on the system is independent of time. So if you put a signal in at 9:05, and then you put the same signal in at 10:10, then what you expect to get out at the output is the same at both points in time. So you don't want to put a signal in at one point in time and then wait 5 minutes later, put the same signal in and then get something different out. So that would just be too confusing. So you want to make sure that the output has got no variation with time. So you want to make sure the output is time, two eyes there, is time invariant. Okay, so the output has to be, so the system has to be linear, and it also has to be time invariant. Okay, so it's got to be linear and it's got to be time invariant. So we call such systems LTI systems, linear time invariant systems. And again, we'll go back to that and talk to that about that in other videos. So we've deliberately made it like that, so we know that if we made it like that and it's made it linear, it ensures that this frequency component is not going to be spread over the output. Okay, so that's the reason for doing that. So we know then that this value of omega isn't going to change. So the only things that can change are the amplitude and the phase. And that's exactly what's happening, what the client has said. The amplitude does change, and the phase also changes here. So we start at a different point here along the curve. That's a difference in the phase. Okay, so you're still going to go and you're still going to go and characterize it, because you know the amplitude changes depending on the frequency, because at low frequencies the output gets amplified by 2, but at high frequencies the output is not amplified, it's actually attenuated. And we're adding on a phase shift as well, so you have to go and see if you can add those things into your characterization of your system. So I've got a second page here. You decide what you've got to do then is you've got to go and you've got to try and put it in here. Is that page? This page here, sorry. Okay, that's us. So you decide then what you're going to do is you're going to have to put in loads of different sine waves in and check and see what output comes out. So what you decide to say, well, what we'll do is we'll put in a sine wave that looks like that. Okay, and then we'll put another sine wave in that is the same height but a higher frequency. Okay, and then we'll put another sine wave in that again is the same height and higher frequency still. In fact, we'll just put loads of these sine waves in the same way that we put loads of DC signals in at the beginning. We've decided we'll put in loads of these sine waves and we'll put it through the box. So that's all the inputs there. That's all the inputs there. And you decide we'll put it through the box and we'll see what all the outputs are. So you get all the outputs. Right, so you get the outputs there that get the same frequency, maybe phase shifted. And the amplitude changes a little bit. Okay, so it's phase shifted. The amplitude here is actually getting attenuated. Okay, and this one here, the amplitude, you know, it comes down, let's say it's very small. So in order to characterize this system, again, you see, look at it in terms of a transfer function. So you say, well, what can we do is we can look at the output and the input for each of these and divide output with input at that frequency, and then see what the value you get. And we can divide output with the input at that frequency. We can divide output, the input at that frequency. And then one engineer says, well, what we could do is, let's imagine what we're putting in terms of a frequency domain. So we're putting in a low frequency value, so we call that the frequency. So let's say we're putting in 5 Hz, so we're putting in a 5 Hz signal, say that's 5 Hz point in the frequency domain, and it's got a certain height, say it's a height of 1, and then we're putting in, say, 10 Hz, it's a height of 1, 15, 20, all the way up. So that's what we're putting in. Okay, and then what we'll do is we'll have a wee look and we'll see what comes out for each of those. So what we see is that we're getting this sort of thing coming out. We're getting these height 1 and these are all height 2, so these are all getting multiplied by 2, but further up the frequency band it starts to get smaller, smaller and smaller. Okay, so now you know that this is what's happening to the amplitude as the frequency changes. And also that you know that there's a phase shift as well. So what you could do is you could in 3 dimensions, if you decided to draw out in 3 dimensions. Okay. In 3 dimensions you could look at that and you could say, well, there's also a phase shift as well. So you could think about all of these as rotating phasors, and you could say that's the real part, that's the imaginary part, and that's a frequency there. And what happens is that the amplitude gets multiplied by 2, but there's also a phase shift, so you can think about it as a phasor rotating down by a certain angle. So that's a phase shift there, and a phase shift, and these things get smaller, and they also shift in different axes. Okay, so they're just like little rotating phasers. But you look at it and say, well, we're not going to give the client that, because this thing here, in effect, is a little response to the system. Okay, now this thing here is the frequency response, which the video is all about. But you decide, well, we're not going to give that to client. We'll give the client two different graphs. We'll give them one graph which tells us how the magnitude of the signal changes with different frequencies. Okay, and then we'll give them a separate drawing which tells them how the phase changes. Now the phase can go from plus pi to minus pi. Okay, so it's plus 180 degrees to minus 180 degrees. Okay, and in this instance here, the phase can just change. Okay, and we'll put in a linear phase shift. So this and this here represent these two changes. So we've got this one representing the change in the amplitude due to the frequency, and the change in the phase due to the frequency. So then you're able to go to the client and say, look, we've got this little thing here called the transfer function. Now one of your engineers says to you, look, it's very difficult this, because if we were going to create this thing here, this transfer function, which has a frequency and a phase as a change in the amplitude due to frequency and a change in the phase due to frequency, if we're going to create that transfer function for another system and another system and then another system, we're going to have to keep putting in all of these sine waves, and we're going to have to divide the output by the input to get a height, and then we're going to have to work out the phase shift as well. So you say that's an awful lot of work in order to work out what your system's doing. It'd be nice if we had just a way of putting all of these signals in at once. And one of our young engineers says, well, look, we've actually got a method of doing that. He says, what you can do is you can use a thing called an impulse function. And the coup de grace in this thing here, if that's time, is that this impulse function, the idea of it is that it's got a infinitely narrow width but infinitely high, and the area under it is 1. Now I've got in the snippet section, I've got video on the impulse function, and also on the playlist on the mathematics of continuous time systems, there's a video on the impulse function. So if you're unsure of that, you can go and have a wee look at that there. So you notice that if you put that signal in, that signal there, if you were to look at that in the frequency domain, it's equivalent of being built up by an infinite number of rotating phasors from plus infinity to minus infinity. So that's omega, and you can imagine all these little phasors. And at that point there, when at t equals 0, all these phasors are just sitting on that same plane. Okay, so that there would in effect tell us that if we were to put in this impulse here, it's equivalent to putting in every single frequency into a system all at once. So that's equivalent to putting in all of these all at once and then looking at this output. So you've got this thing here that you can put in, and you, at the output, what you're going to get out when you put this thing into your system, so you're going to get your system there like that, which is some system here, and when you put that input in, that delta t, what you're going to get out is the transfer function, okay, which is you're going to get out the frequency response of the system. Okay, so the frequency response system is going to look like that. Okay, that's omega, that's h of j omega. So when you put this signal in, it's equivalent to putting all of these in all at once. Okay, and what you're going to get out is the outputs here, okay, all at once. Okay, so the output you're going to get out here is your frequency response. Okay, so that there is the crux of the frequency response method. So what we want to do then is we're able to then go along to the client, and we're also obviously going to have our phase response associated with that as well. Okay, so what we can do then is we can say, well, if we can take this impulse response, so that there is the response of a system to an impulse, but it's in the frequency domain. Okay, I'll say that again. It's the impulse response, so it's the response of a system. Okay, but it's the response of the system in the time domain, which is then be put into the frequency domain. Okay, to give you this h of j omega. So we could take this h of j omega, and we can multiply that by whatever input we have, I of j omega, and that is going to give you your output as a function of j omega. Okay, so that there really is the impulse response method, and that's really what we want to get to in this video. Now, you as the managing director have a look at that and say, well, that's fine and it's interesting, but can we just put this whole thing into the time domain? Could we just not have it so that we could have an output that as a function of time, and say that equals some function of time at the h of t times an input, and can we just multiply these together? And one engineer says, well, you can't actually multiply them, you have to convolve them together. Okay, but if you convolve them together, then you can do this in the time domain. Okay, so we have two options then. We can look at the frequency response, which is this h of j omega, or we can look at the impulse response, which is just the frequency response in the time domain. Okay, so it's just these mapped into the time domain. So those are the two options, and this video really has been about the frequency response method. Next video we're going to look at the impulse response method using this impulse response h of t. Okay, so that's all there is for this video. Hope it's of use, and I'll get you on the next video. Okay, bye bye.